Sizing fonts is basically a font property, and we've been using different methods of sizing fonts in some of the previous exercises, but what we need to do now is we need to really talk about how you're able to size fonts and the different methods and what the advantages and downsides of using each one are. Basically, using CSS, you have a huge array of selections as far as sizing units. You have keywords, ems, x's, pixels, percents, picas, points, inches, centimeters, millimeters. So quite a few. We're not going to be discussing all of them because some of them just, you really never use them. Basically, there's three types of values to size fonts. They're absolute, which are pixels and inches, relative, which are percent or ems, and then what I call the T-shirt sizes, which are essentially keywords, but they're sizes like extra small, extra extra small, extra extra large, so they're kind of reminiscent of a t-shirt. The t-shirt sizes are relative to the user's preferred medium setting, and we'll discuss that a little bit more coming up, but all of these methods have advantages and disadvantages, and at some point you'll probably use, quite a few of them, and perhaps even a mixture of several of them. So let me just share with you the file that we're going to be working on for this example. Basically, this is the file, and I have a couple of things already defined, and I'll come back and explain these in a second. Let me just show you what the page looks like in the browser. Here's the page in the browser. And basically, I have some text right here, which I have headings and paragraphs. And then down here, I have divs. And I've put a border around all of my divs so you could clearly kind of see and separate the different values, because we're going to be using like pixels to size this box, ems to size this box, and down here percent. So we'll talk about that in a little while. But we're going to start off by talking about the keyword or the t-shirt sizing. So I'm just going to make my web page a little bit more narrow right here. Before we actually get into the code, I do want to share with you something that definitely is important when considering size to use. On the web, the user's browser sets the font at a particular size. The default size for just about all browsers is about 16 pixels, which is pretty large. So this is the default size right here. The only thing I actually changed here was I changed the font face from the default sans serif, the serif font to a sans serif, and I believe I styled it to be Verdana right here. But I haven't specified any actual size, so this is just the default 16 point. This is pretty big for a web page. It's just really large, so you wouldn't want to use this by default. You would definitely want to size down. Now, the user is able to size the fonts up and down themselves, and this of course is going to affect your web page. They do this by going up into their browser, and you can't see the very top of my menu item here. I'm using Firefox, but if I go to View and I come down to Zoom, I'm able to zoom in, zoom out, or reset. And on my Mac, the keyboard shortcuts are Command plus, Command minus, or Command 0. If you're using a PC, more than likely, and pretty much all the browsers, your keyboard shortcuts to do this are going to be Control plus, Control minus, and Control 0. Some of the browsers have this set, they'll say instead of zoom, it'll be like make text bigger, make text smaller, but it's usually under the view menu and it's pretty easy to find. So if I go ahead and I increase my text by going Command plus, you can see how all the text gets bigger. And if I do Command minus, conversely, my text gets smaller. The advantage of being able to do this is that if someone has poor eyesight or needs to make the font bigger, they can do so. So you don't want to disable that function because, certain groups of people may rely on this more than others. So you always want to, if possible, leave this ability there so that the user is able to change the size of the font. So we'll be kind of coming back to this as we learn more about sizing fonts. I'm going to come back to my HTML document, my XHTML document, and I just want, you've already seen what it looks like. Basically, inside my body, I have some H2 paragraphs. I have some different headers right here, which will size differently. And then I have these divs, as I explained before. So here's my first div, and I called it pixel example. And inside my div, I basically have an H3, I have an H2, and then I have a paragraph, and then I have an unordered list with a nested unordered list. And all of the divs that I'm using are basically set up exactly the same. They just have a different ID, so this one's called M example, and then they contain the exact same content. So they have headers 3, 2, paragraphs, and then an unordered list with a nested unordered list. And my final div is down here called %example. So that's how my XHTML document is set up. If we look up here in the styles, these are the styles that I've defined already. I have a just font family style on my body, and that's just to globally change my font face. I have a class that I've named bold, and I'm not using that yet, but I might want to use that later on. And then I have a style for my div pixel example, M example, and %example. And all I'm setting here is I'm setting the border around these divs. So here I have a 2 pixel solid gray border, and then I've set some spacing on the right and left of either of these. I've set padding all around. Top and bottom is set to 0, and right and left is set to 5. Padding is on the inside of the box and margins on the outside, and we'll talk about this soon. We haven't really covered it yet, but we will get to it. So that's what the style is. It's basically just to add this border around these divs, and that's so that you could clearly see this is where this section of code ended. And the final style that we have included in this file is on each of the divs that I just showed you, I have styled the H3. And basically this style right here is to generate this dotted line that goes underneath the H3. And I put a little bit of padding and margin values just to push it away from the edge so it was a little more legible for the user to be able to see. So we'll go ahead and we will work around these styles. Now you kind of know what they're doing. We'll be talking more in detail about margin and padding in a later lecture file. So if you're not quite sure how they work, we will return to that, but I just wanted to give you an overview of what was going on before we got started. So what we're going to do next is we're going to go ahead and we're going to specify styles for the what I'm calling the t-shirt size keywords, and we'll go ahead and we'll style the header 1, header 3, and some paragraph text right here. So let's get started doing that in our document. So to start, we'll make styles for our keyword or a t-shirt type section. I'm going to come down into the code and I'm going to put a div around this portion of my web page, which basically is going to encompass all of this text right here. So let's go ahead and just add a div right there. I'm going to open the div tag and I'm going to go ahead and assign an ID to it, and we'll just call the ID t-shirt. And then I'm going to come down here to the end and I'm going to close my div. And this is just going to allow me to talk to this portion of the web page. I'm going to come back up here into my style section, and we'll start by creating some styles for the t-shirt div that we just created. So I'm going to type the name of the div exactly as I created it below, and then I'll go ahead and put in my opening and closing curly brace, and let's just go ahead and let's add the font dash size attribute. I'm going to copy this because I'm going to be using it several times here, so I want to make sure that I just make it easy on myself. So the first thing we'll do is we'll go ahead and we'll style the paragraphs of the t-shirt div. So I'm just going to go ahead and add my p tag in here, and the font size that we're going to use on the paragraphs is going to be small. So I'm just going to go ahead and type small. When you're using the t-shirt type sizing, you basically have sizes like extra small, extra small, small, medium, large, extra large, and extra large. And basically they aren't particularly very accurate, because what you're going to get is you're going to end up with sizes that you don't have a lot of control over. So let's come to our web page and let's reload the page right here. You can see that it does indeed make the fonts quite a bit smaller, but as I said before, you just have these, kind of t-shirt sizing, and you can't get very accurate. The other downside is these keyword type sizes don't display consistently in all browsers. So in addition to just offering limited number of sizes, you're not going to get really consistent results on multiple browsers, which is really hard to create a design that's going to utilize this. So I used small on the paragraph. I'm going to come back here and I'll make a size for my H1 tag. So I'm going to go ahead and type H1, and we'll go ahead and make the font size for that XX large. And if I save this and come back to the browser and refresh, you can see that that didn't really change our header 1 at all. So that must be the same as whatever the default size of H1 is. If I change this to just extra large and I refresh, you can see that it does change. Now there's a considerable amount of difference between the extra large and the extra large, and there's nothing in between. So if I'm using these keywords, I either have, fairly large or more of like a medium size header, and I don't get anything in between. Again, that's a bit of a downside of using this sort of sizing attribute. We'll go ahead and we'll just put a large size on our H3. So let's come back to the browser and refresh, and you can see it just sized it down a tiny bit. So this is an example of using the keyword type sizing. I really wouldn't recommend using those very much because they are so limiting and they're not very accurate. As a matter of fact, I don't think I've ever used keywords, but I wanted to share them with you because they are part of our CSS rules out there and properties that are available, and so I wanted to make you aware of them. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and start styling these little boxes that I've made that basically have places for pixel, M, and then down below %. So I'm going to start by using my pixel text size values. I already have the divs in place in our XHTML, so if we look here you can see that my div ID pixel example has been wrapped around this portion of text. So we'll go ahead and we'll just make a style to accommodate that. I'm going to go ahead and create my kind of skeleton tag here that I can use. Since we'll be doing this multiple times, it makes sense for me to type it out and just to copy it so that I can put in the next value when I'm ready to do so. So we'll go ahead and we'll start by sizing the paragraph just like we did before. So I'm going to add my P in here, and we're going to go ahead and make the paragraph equal to 10 pixels. I just typed the pixel amount and then I put PX after it. So if I save and I refresh in my browser, you can now see that my paragraph text has been set to 10 pixels. This is exactly 10 pixels. This is an absolute size. Pixel values are the easiest to understand since you're probably already familiar in designing web components and web elements with pixels. They are completely independent from any browser settings, so when you specify a paragraph to be 10 pixels or a header to be 32 pixels, you get exactly that in all browsers, period. It always comes out the same way. Web designers definitely cherish pixel values because they're going to provide consistent text sizes across different types of computers, different types of browsers, etc. That is certainly an advantage of using our pixel values. Now the downside of using pixel values, and unfortunately there is a downside, the downside is that not all browsers are going to allow the viewer to change the size of the pixels. So it does work in the browser that I'm using. I'm going to set the H2 to 32 pixels and I'm going to save, and we'll come here and reload, and it does do this. If I come up to my view and I change my zoom and I zoom in or out, it will change my pixel values. But on some of the browsers, specifically IE6, that is not going to work. So this is going to definitely create some accessibility issues for your user and could potentially limit access to your site for people with disabilities. I just checked, and as of June 2008, 37% of users are still using IE6, and that's a pretty large market share to discount, so it's probably not a very wise choice to do that. Now, in some situations, pixel values may be acceptable to use. If you were using them to set a value for your navigation or something where you wanted it to be fixed and you wanted to have control over it because it might possibly break your design, that might be okay. But setting pixel values for the body copy is probably not a good idea. I mean, I might be able to read 10 pixel font just fine, but someone who comes to my website might have some trouble and they might want to make this larger to be able to really see the content that I have right here. So ultimately, you're going to need to know your audience and create sites that's going to accommodate their needs. And if you have a wide diversity in your audience, you're going to have to create something that's going to work for pretty much everyone. I'm going to come down here and I'm going to style my UL tag, which is my unordered list, and I'm just going to set the unordered list to be the same as my paragraph, 10 pixels. So I'll save that and we'll refresh. You can see that the unordered list was unaffected by the other rules that I created, and you can see that both my unordered list and the nested list, they all resize down to the 10 pixel size. This is an advantage of using pixel sizes, is that nested items, nested tags are going to always stay that fixed value. If I set the UL to be 10 pixels, all ULs are going to be 10 pixels. It doesn't matter where they are. So that is an advantage, but definitely keep in mind the downside of using the pixel sizes. Now, newer browsers are going to allow the user to resize based on pixel values, but there's still such a large market share that is using a browser that doesn't support it, that it's probably not the best idea to use that. The next thing we need to talk about is relative sizing, and basically both ems and percents are relative. As a matter of fact, our keywords are actually relative too. And relative sizes basically adjust the text in relationship to the font size defined by the browser. They give you ems and percent are going to give you much finer control than your keyword type of sizing. Every browser, as we know, is pre-programmed with a base text size. In most browsers, that happens to be 16 pixels, which is, as I said before, far too big. You can adjust the base size in your browser through changing your view menu, which we discussed. Whatever setting's been chosen is going to be the base size for that particular browser's equivalent of 100%. So in other words, for most browsers, if I just leave it at my default value, the CSS percentage is 100%. It's the same as setting my font to 16 pixels. In turn, if I set my M value to 1M, that's the same as just using the default font size for the browser. So in this case, it would be 16 pixels. So this is 16 pixels. I haven't styled it yet. This is 16 pixels. I haven't styled it yet. It makes it easy to resize things with percent values, because if I wanted something to be twice as big, like if I wanted my heading to be 32 pixels, I'm just going to multiply it by 200%. Conversely, M's are going to allow you to just specify the M value to 2 M's. M's are basically, like, once you understand how percentages work, you pretty much know everything you need to know about M's. They work exactly the same way. M's are probably more prevalent with web designers because of their roots in typography. The word M comes from the print world, and it basically refers to the size of a capital M for a particular font. In the web world, and using M's with CSS, it no longer really means the same thing. You can think of it as referring to the base text size. So the value of 1M is going to mean the same thing as a value of 100%. And for most browsers, that's going to equate to 16 pixels base size font. When you use a percent value, you just multiply by that percent value. With an M, you're just going to multiply by the M value. So for instance, if I was going to set the M to 0.5 M's, it would be the same as multiplying by 50%. It would make whatever that base size font is half its original size. So if I was going to, here, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to set my paragraphs to 0.75 M's. That would be the same as multiplying my base size font by 75%. So if we multiply 16 by 75%, that's going to give us 12 pixels essentially. So this is how you can figure out how to use M's. And M's can be a little daunting if you've never used them before, but once you get used to them and kind of figure out how they work, it will become much easier for you to resize things using M's. And the advantage of using M's and percent size is that the user is able to resize their text, and then the text is going to accommodate that. I'm going to go ahead and just copy my skeleton tag right here so that I can copy paste it. We'll set the size for paragraphs first, and let's go ahead and set them to 0.75 M's. I'm going to save, and we'll refresh in our browser over here. When I come over here and I reload the page, you can see how my paragraph text has now resized down. It is slightly bigger than the 10 pixels we specified up here in our pixels, and that's because this is basically equal to 12 pixels. So 0.75 M's, if there's no settings to the base size font, is going to go ahead and equal about 12 pixels. Let's go ahead and set our heading. So I'm going to go ahead and set a style on my M div for H2, and we'll set the font size here to 2 M's, which is the same as multiplying by 200. So that should give me a font size of 32 pixels, and if we compare it up here to our pixel value, they do look very similar. They're basically the same size. Now let's go ahead and let's resize our unordered list. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to specify the style for UL, and we'll set that to the same as our paragraph text, which is going to be 0.75 M's, and I'll save. And if we refresh in the browser, you can see that it does scale my unordered list down to 0.75 M's. Now, if you look at my nested list, there is a problem. My nested list gets tiny. It gets very small. And basically, this is the downside of using relative sizes. The downside is that relative sizes inherit the font size of the parent tag. So when you create something like a nested list, like we have right here, the nested list, which is another UL tag inside of the original UL tag, if we look at our XHTML document, you can see, and it's the same in any of these examples, it doesn't matter which one. Here's my opening UL, and then I have some list items. Then I start another UL, and it closes here, and then I have some more list items from my original, and then I close the parent UL. So this list right here is nested inside of this list. If we come back here and we look, we can see that the little nested list is little teeny tiny, and that's because basically what's happening is the tags are kind of compiling and multiplying on top. It's basically taking the original list and multiplying it by 75%, which is giving us about 12 pixels. Then it's taking that, which is now the new base amount for this unordered list, and it's multiplying it by 75%. So this font size down here is probably closer to like 9 pixels. And every time we add a nested item inside of a nested item inside of a nested item, it's going to continue to do that. So that's kind of the conundrum of using these relative sizing. The workaround is basically to set a style for the nested list. So let's do that right now. I'm going to come back up here to my styles. I'm going to paste in my skeleton tag, and then I'm going to set a style for UL space UL. So now I'm targeting the nested list. Now, you might think that I would set the font size to 0.75 M's. Not so. I need to set the font size to actually 1 M. And this is basically going to set it back to the base size of the original parent tag. So if I refresh now, you're going to see that now the nested list matches the parent list. So by setting the nested list to 100%, the surrounding UL's tag it's going to basically go ahead and set this to the same value as the surrounding parent size tag. It's going to go back to the original 75%. It's a little confusing when you first start to learn about this, so if it sounds kind of weird to you, you're not alone. It definitely is a confusing concept to understand, but once you get it, then you'll be able to use it confidently. So you just basically kind of have to work with it until you get a feel for how it works. Percentages basically work the same way. So percent values work the same way as M's. So we're just going to go ahead and set up our styles for percent values so we can see how this is working. I'll go ahead and I will set up my skeleton like we did before. So percent example is the name of my ID, and I need to start that with a hash mark, of course. Inside my tag, I'm going to go ahead and specify the font size with a colon, and I'll just copy this to make it quicker for me to do this later on. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to target my P tag first, and we'll set the percent value to 80%. So this is just going to be just over like 12 pixels. So this is 80% paragraph text right here. And you can see that it's affecting that. We'll go ahead and we'll size this heading up to 200%, which should basically give us the same 32 pixel size that we used before. So we're going to be targeting our H2 tag here. I'm going to go ahead and multiply it by 200%. And while we're at it, let's just go ahead and set our UL. And I'm going to set the UL to 80%, the same as I did the paragraph. So if we come here and we refresh, you can now see that my heading is set to 200%. And if we look at the list is doing something very similar to what we got when we first had our M's. It's setting the first parent UL, but my nested UL is getting scaled down an additional amount. So to fix this, I need to set the nested UL back to 100%. I would come in here and I would create a style for UL and set the size to 100%. And once I do this, it will go ahead and it will display correctly. So now everything displays correctly. So this is how we use sizing, and I wanted to make sure that you were familiar with some of the other concepts before I introduced sizing, because it can be kind of confusing. The more you work with it, the better and more comfortable you're going to feel about using these relative values. I would definitely encourage you to get comfortable with using the relative values because they are so much more flexible when it comes to cross-browser issues. Pixels do have their place, but if we were to view this on IE6 on the PC, we would run into problems when we resize our text. And if you have the ability to test on your browser in IE6, I would recommend that you do that so you can see how the pixels are just going to stay at whatever size you set them at. They won't resize like the rest of these guys. If you guys don't have IE6, you're just going to have to trust me, but definitely it is an issue and you want to accommodate the majority of your users. So keep that in mind when you're sizing text.